psychology major, Laura Angelucci, who's talking tonight about we need more men involved in feminism. All right.
Thank you. According to the American Psychological Association, more than 3 women in the United States are murdered every day by a boyfriend or husband. The reasons why something awful like that can happen here where we live are really complicated and confusing, but the solution isn't, because the solution is feminism. After having been a victim of teen dating violence myself, I've become not only interested but really passionate about feminism and gender issues for the past few years. And the great thing about feminism is that we all need it. It's not just for women, it's for everybody. Because everybody is hurt by things like stereotypes, sexism, and gender violence. But we can't achieve gender equality, women alone. And we can't achieve it unless everybody is involved, unless we have everybody's support. And the problem right now is that we need more men involved in feminism. There are a lot of reasons why men might not be involved in feminism right now, but I'm going to entertain 3 possibilities why they might not be as involved as they could be. The first is that perhaps we're not all on the same page, we're not all in agreement about what feminism means. So I'd like to quote the United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, Emma Watson, in her He for She campaign speech. She said that feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities. It's the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. So that's both sexes, it's not just women. And yet men remain relatively uninvolved. A second possibility why that might be is explained by Dr. Jackson Katz in a TED Talk that he gave in 2013 about gender violence. He says it's because dominant groups are rarely challenged to consider their own dominance, and so their positions of social superiority, if you will, go unthreatened. So that perpetuation of their dominance generally keeps men from being involved in feminism and other gender issues like that. The third contributor that I'm going to talk about is sexism, and we can argue that sexism is a cause of men not being involved. We can say that it's an effect. We could say it's an interaction. We're not sure about that part, but the point is that it's a factor, and the point is that it's an obstacle. Now, I think we all know what sexism is, but maybe you're not all aware about how it affects not just our society, because it obviously does, but how it affects every single person in this room as well. So I could talk about that all day long, about how sexism affects all of us, but in the interest of time, I'll give you one example. Some of you might be familiar with the story of Elliot Rodger. If you're not, according to the New York Times, he was a 22-year-old student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he murdered 6 innocent people and injured 13 others. The reasons he gave for doing this were loneliness, sexual frustration, and being deprived of the sexual gratification and attention he felt he deserved from the women in his life. This is not rare. This happens, unfortunately, quite often. So how is an act of violent sexism like that harmful for women? I hope that's relatively obvious, but I want to give you an example that's pretty relatable. I don't know if any of you have ever wondered about or noticed women's tendency to give fake phone numbers to men at clubs and parties and stuff like that, right? I mean, we've all noticed that before. Why do women do that? Is it to screw with guys' heads? Is it to throw them off? Is it like a playing hard to get thing? It's not any of those things at all, not even a little bit. The reason why women do things like that is because it's safer to give a man a fake phone number than to give him nothing. Safer than looking at him and saying, sorry, I'm just not interested. And if you don't believe me, some women have paid for that kind of romantic rejection with their lives, like the women who knew Elliot Rodger. That's all they did. They just told him they weren't interested. How is it harmful to men, though? That's probably a lot less obvious. But generally, as stories like this surface more and our society becomes more aware of violent acts of sexism like this, society's view of men is going to change. It's already begun to change, if you haven't noticed. And we'll start to view men as these simple, sex-starved animals, and all they care about is sex, and all they can think about is sex, and they'll do anything to get it, even kill people. And that's ridiculous, isn't it? It's awful, because it's not true at all. That's not what men are. Men are complex, thinking, feeling beings, just like women are. And that in and of itself, which is one of a million examples, should be reason enough to not only outrage everybody in this room, but motivate you to fight for feminism, especially the men. Because if you don't, then one day you're going to be placed in the same social category as a man like Elliot Rodger, a murderer. That's why we need men to fight for feminism. It's because sexism and other things like that harm men too. Elliot Rodger didn't just kill women. Men died that day too. That's why it's an important issue, because whether we'd like to admit it or not, misogyny actually kills people. And the more tragic stories like this that we become aware of, the more we start to wonder, where does sexism actually come from, though? Where does it originate? How does it happen? How do people like Elliot Rodger get to that point? Well, again, there are a million reasons why I could talk about it all day, but I'm going to focus on one, and that is men in power reinforcing male dominance. How does that, though, perpetuate sexism and therefore the lack of male involvement in feminism? Well, 3 psychologists from the University of Queensland in Australia conducted a study last year and found that a man's perceived social dominance is a driving force. That's a quote. A driving force behind his behaviors and attitudes toward women, which includes, but is not limited to, because there are many, a response to romantic rejection with aggression and persistence. Sound familiar? Maybe. To put that into context, if you'll remember what I told you Dr. Katz said at the beginning of my speech, in his TED Talk, he said that dominant groups' dominance is rarely threatened. What happens when it is, though? The power that women wield over romantic decisions represents a violation of our society's gender hierarchy. So when a woman romantically rejects a man, threatens his perceived social dominance, and he is way more likely to respond with aggression and persistence. And according to this study, that's where hostile sexism is born. Unfortunately, the problem is so much more complicated than that, and that's literally the most simple I could make it, and it's still extremely complicated. So much so that it seems insurmountable sometimes. But it's not, it really isn't. We can move towards gender equality together, but men have to be more involved. And there are a lot of ways that they can do this, but I'm going to focus on 4 main ones. The first is you can participate in a program. For example, there's one at the University of Connecticut called Men's Project, developed by psychologist Gail Stewart. And it's a sexual assault prevention program. And it's proven to be extremely effective in reducing acts and thoughts of gender violence. Now, there are programs like this all across the country. You don't have to go to Connecticut. But it also sounds like a bit of a time commitment, I know. So I'm going to give you 3 others that are simpler and easier, things that you can do every day to be more involved as a male feminist. The first is to treat the women in your life like your equals. Every conversation, every situation, every day, no matter what. The second is to stand up for feminism even in small ways. So if you, for example, if you have a friend who makes a derogatory statement towards women, stand up and say, you know, that's not cool, that's not fair. That could be my sister you're talking about. Don't say something like that. And the third way is to get your friends talking about it. Bring up these issues whenever everyone's hanging out. Talk about them. Because if every university had a men's project, and if every man showed leadership in those ways, then male involvement in feminism would explode, and we'd change the world. And I know that because not one country on this planet can claim that they've achieved gender equality yet. But we could be the first. We really could, because every single person in this room now knows how to start. Women can't do it alone. So I'd like to read you a quote from philosopher James Sturba that he wrote in an essay about men and feminism. And he said that men have a particularly valuable contribution to make. If a man advocates for feminism, it is more likely that feminist goals can be obtained. So make your valuable contribution. And not just because it's the right thing to do, morally, but do it for the safety and the happiness and equality of yourself and your friends, your girlfriend, your sister, your mom, one day your wife and your children.